The flood has been catastrophic to us, from 100 head of cattle to 10 machines, 2 harvesters, 2 4-wheel drives, 2 cars, 2 excavators, and 2 forklifts. It just goes on and on.
Tony Carusi has just returned home after the second major flood in a month added insult to injury.
Unfortunately, we had no flood insurance on any of our houses. We've lost three of our houses.
Tony's once thriving cane, cattle and rice farm has been frozen in time and mud since the first flood, the big one in early March.
Where do you start and where to from here are the two main sort of things that you think of.
Tony's property sits between the flood-gutted river towns of Woodburn and Broadwater. As far as the eye can see is a giant stagnating lake bordered on one side by the M1 Pacific motorway.
The M1, as we see it, is basically, it's like a dam wall on the eastern side of Woodburn. Not saying that there wouldn't have been a major flood, of course there would have been, but not to the extent that what we've sustained.
Well, the water cannot get away. It's like it's holding water back.
In Woodburn, former concreter Rod Smith is waiting for the water in his backyard to drain away, but it's taking longer than it ever has.
See, it's even flooding now. It's starting to flood in.
He also blames the M1.
The Black Snake is what I call that highway.
Rod's neighbour Steve, who's lived in Woodburn for 50 years, has another name for the M1.
A dam. Dam, that's what it is, it's a dam wall. Not enough holes in it. Not enough holes to let the water out.
That's the highway. That's what caused this.
Is your place livable?
Nah.
I met John in Broadwater a few days after the first big flood.
The old fellas have always said if the river's flowing here, we don't get flooded because it widens out up the road. But when they built the highway, we asked them why they weren't going to do viaduct like Kempsey, and they said bugger off.
There's no denying the M1 is an engineering marvel. 2 lanes each way connecting Sydney and Brisbane. It took 30 years to build.
We have been investigating and assessing flooding in the regions surrounding the upgrade since 2012. As part of this process, a number of culverts were replaced with bridges, creating larger openings for floodwater to flow through.
During planning and construction, communities were told in a major flood the new highway could cause a minor increase in water levels, up to 50 millimetres in homes and 400 mils on rural land. The public was also invited to meetings to ensure local knowledge and information from real flooding events was captured and considered. At those meetings, Tony Carusi and others argued for more bridges and larger drains so floodwaters could escape.
Basically, they just simply did not listen to the local knowledge that we were able to impass on them, not even to local engineers. For myself, I've got the feeling that all we were there is so that they could tick the box and say that they've consulted.
The final section of the M1 crossed the Clarence and Richmond River floodplains, the hardest hit region during the recent deluge.
I can't think of a more significant infrastructure project in the last 30 years that has probably had more impact on people's lives than this one.
Beck Ellam says the impact on her property, 40 kilometres south of Woodburn, has been disastrous. The mother of 3 grows peaches, macadamias and sugarcane. Her family also runs a coffee shop and petting zoo right next to the M1.
The water is banking up from all directions in this spot here, and it has nowhere to go.
In the dry, the drain looks like this, but in the wet, Beck's beef is that even in moderate rain events, a raging river is channeled from the highway into her and her neighbour's land.
It's shattered our properties, it's shattered our hearts. We're struggling to survive.
Beck and fellow farmers like Keith McLaren began lobbying for better drainage years before the M1 was finished.
I can't tell you how many times we've had meetings with them, but it's just to tick a box to say that they've had a meeting with us, and they go away and I think they scrunch the paper up and throw it away.
The New South Wales Cane Growers Association also campaigned for more bridges across the floodplains but were told they weren't needed.
They always felt that they've never been listened to, and now they know they haven't been listened to because of the impacts.
We met Councillor Deborah Novak under the M1's spectacular Harwood Bridge, which crosses the Clarence River. She created a Facebook group for locals to document flooding around the new highway. In this photo, the floodwaters are muddy brown. The M1 is highlighted in red.
It clearly demonstrates the impact of the M1 and how it's actually holding the floodwaters back. If it looks like a levee wall and smells like a levee wall, isn't it a levee wall?
Across the Clarence, Shane Williams is cleaning up his childcare centre for the second time in a month.
You live on the river, mate? You play by the river rules? But the river rules have changed.
And Shane predicted that change nearly 2 years ago in a local news article where he warned drainage around the M1 would make flooding worse.
Now all this water's got to go back, and it can't. It's stuck here.
Just as frustrating is how often the motorway has had to be closed during flooding.
Many people on the river got sacrificed for a highway to go from Sydney to Brisbane, flood-free. Hadn't worked once, mate. Every time it's flooded and blocked, so it didn't work. So we all got sacrificed for a highway that didn't go flood-free anyway, so.
We can't stop nature. We can't mitigate flood-proof or drought-proof anything. We need to work out how to live with what nature dishes up.
Professor Peter Coombs is one of the country's foremost water resources experts. He says now is the time to get first-hand information from locals about the flow of floodwaters around the M1, because it's unlikely we've seen the worst of what Mother Nature can dish up.
No matter what you design, nature will send something bigger eventually, and then it'll be overwhelmed.
And overwhelmed is understandably how many who live in the path of floods are feeling.
It's breaking my heart. Yep. And this has been on for like nearly a month.
That's where the water come to. Every single person that lives on the floodplain is going through the same thing. That's sort of unified the community, and that's been one of the strengths that's sort of keeping everyone going. Can the M1 be fixed to alleviate further flooding? I don't know. I suppose the old saying, you can fix anything if you throw enough money at it. But the thing that's disappointed us so much is, why didn't you design it correctly in the first place?
Gosh, these poor people who have had their lives destroyed twice now, and to have had those conversations and for nothing to be done. I mean, I hope something can be fixed, you know, but I don't know, is that it? Is that how the structure is? Is there anything that can be done to alleviate that, or to make some kind of pathway through
They're going to have to do something.
Yeah.
That's a lot of very expensive infrastructure that they'll have to undo. But we can't keep seeing this every flood season. And it just goes to show local knowledge is always the most valuable information you can have before you do something like this in such an area that's so prone to flooding.
Absolutely.
So we went in search of answers. The Federal Minister for Infrastructure and Transport, Barnaby Joyce, declined to comment on flooding around the highway, referring us instead to the New South Wales Minister for Transport, David Elliott. He then handballed our inquiry to the Minister for Regional Transport and Roads, Sam Farraway, and we are still awaiting a response from his office.